Les gens, les boxeurs qui sont en style commencent très agressifs. Ils ont toujours ces t-shirts un peu à la Tyson, là, les shorts de cours, un petit
And what I say, you must obey, just like the both of you took my
Et là, Maïva, ce sont les yeux.
La droite est renvoyée. Ouais, mais le crochet. Magnifique shot.
Ah, c'est un vrai faux pas.
Et ouais, le crochet au foie, il a touché.
Ah, c'est un vrai faux pas.
Pendant Bigois, encore
Maïva,
un rouge.
faux pas.
Allez, c'est fait dur là, Lydia qui a arrêté.
Oui, forcément, elle remet un genou au sol.
Et elle regarde son point. Ça va dans tous les sens, la part des deux boxeuses. Et tout ça par du bon point. Et la touche par du bon point. Elle a du mal, Viviane. Elle a du mal à récupérer.
Okay, we'll start with this. Per tweet from Michael Benson, Deontay Wilder said, "When you have devastating power, you're always going to be the leader of the pack. Some say skills, but that's a broken record. We've seen many guys with skills, and they've still lost. You have power, you're never out of a fight." And the same is true in reverse. There have been a lot of guys, big punchers, lots of power.
Schaefer was a bigger puncher than Ali.
Muhammad Ali still outpointed him over the course of 15 rounds. He was also stopped by Larry Holmes.
George Foreman was a bigger puncher than Ali, too.
And Sonny Liston. Muhammad Ali still outskilled both of them. More recently, Anthony Joshua. You know, he's a bigger puncher than Alexander Usyk, but it was Alexander Usyk's skill that was able to overcome the size and power of Anthony Joshua.
You know, Wilder's no student of the game.
No, I'm not expecting Deontay Wilder to be some kind of a boxing historian privy to all things boxing. But when you have a guy who says he doesn't need skill because he has power, it's safe to say he's not, according to Hoyle, student of the game. He added, "Even on my worst night and his best night, he still couldn't get me out of there. People try to label it as a knockout, but that's not a knockout. That's a stoppage because of a weak individual in my team who threw the towel in."
We're still taking shots at Mark Breland.
You know, had Mark Breland not thrown the towel in, there may not have been enough left of Deontay Wilder for a third fight. People familiar with the business, they can tell you a sustained beating, that's a lot worse than a flash knockout.
A sustained beating would take years off your career.
It is those sustained beatings that cause the most damage to a fighter throughout the course of their career. Deontay Wilder on Tyson Fury, calling him the most dangerous heavyweight out there. Well, I've already knocked him out once before. I'm sure he replays that in his head over and over. That's why he's so brave to say I'm the most dangerous. I am. It's true facts.
Nah, it's just Tyson Fury indirectly glorifying himself by glorifying you.
It's just Tyson Fury indirectly tooting his own horn for having been the only man to beat Deontay Wilder, even though Deontay Wilder hasn't offered every man that same opportunity.
He offered it to Luis Ortiz 2 times, and who else?
Nobody. Tyson Fury himself addressed Deontay Wilder's cheating conspiracy theory by saying, "We did. It was all a big conspiracy. Me, JD's, Mark Breland, the rest of his team, all in on it. You're not safe anywhere. We can get to you anywhere, motherfucker." All his team are on the payroll.
Obvious sarcasm.
That won't be so obvious to Deontay Wilder's sycophants, the dumb dullards that make up his core fan base. Boxing is a dirty sport, don't get me wrong. And Tyson Fury...
We did get popped for Nandrolone.
So getting popped for Nandrolone and loading your gloves with shoehorns and shake weights, Acme anvils, spiking the other guy's water.
Getting popped for Nandrolone's a far cry from all of that.
Not even trying to convince you that Tyson Fury is squeaky clean.
Nah.
Quite the opposite. He is a walking, talking contradiction as well. I don't got a horse in this race.
Yeah, I don't really care who wins.
So in regards to the Glovegate conspiracy and how many individuals it would effectively implicate, how many individuals would have to be complicit with this alleged cheating, all I can say is there are more practical ways of fixing a fight. And that's what you're suggesting. You're suggesting they fix this fight by allowing Tyson Fury to walk in there with foreign metal objects encased inside of his gloves, while at the same time Mark Breland spikes your punch. None of this comes up in a toxicology report. None of this comes up
in a VADA test.
Tyson Fury's Nandrolone case is a far cry from what Deontay Wilder is suggesting, because what Deontay Wilder is suggesting is criminal assault.
Hiding metal objects inside of the glove.
Drugging Deontay Wilder ahead of the fight in order to weaken him. I mean, if there were any evidence of this at all, it wouldn't be up to Deontay Wilder to pursue legal action.
Wouldn't even have to press charges.
They clearly could. if there were any evidence of this, and he could sue Tyson Fury for millions. At the same time, Tyson Fury, he wouldn't be able to get a boxing license anywhere in the country because he'd be in jail.
We're talking about felony assault.
What you're talking about, and there are more practical ways of fixing a fight than what Deontay Wilder is describing, because far too many individuals would have to be complicit.
Doesn't make any sense.
In a recent training clip released by the PBC ahead of Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 3, Wilder tells himself, I only gotta do half of that. He ain't good. I only gotta do half of that. He ain't what people think. He's a fucking cheater.
Well, maybe, but I mean, it didn't seem to bother you until he beat you.
Deontay Wilder hasn't produced any evidence whatsoever Tyson Fury cheated in either the second fight or the first fight, the way that he alleges. And the cheating that he and his supporters are referring to has more to do with what happened in the Christian Hammer fight than either of his fights with Deontay Wilder. And it seems like Tyson Fury's sketchy past, it didn't bother you till he beat you, making this case of sour grapes.
If he's so sketchy, why'd you give him a title shot?
Well, now you want to talk about his sketchy past, his sketchy history, his history of cheating. Well, that's the same history he had when you decided to climb into bed with him and give him that title shot, because he wasn't your mandatory challenger. You didn't owe him the shot. You gave it to him, voluntarily.
You wanted to give him that shot.
Now that it backfired, blew up in your face, what, you want sympathy?
For your cherry pick gone wrong?
If he's such a cheater, why are you fighting him for a third time? Oh, right. You want it back in blood.
It's very theatrical.
About as theatrical as Deontay Wilder's latest regalia for this weekend's upcoming fight. We're seeing the first images of what Deontay Wilder will be wearing for his ring walk.
Looks like Halloween came early.
It's very Lord Sauron meets Liberace.
Lady Gaga.
Let's hope it's not too heavy for him this time, since the last time, post-fight, it was Deontay Wilder himself that attributed his costume and what he wore for the ring walk to his weakened state. That quickly became
Convoluted conspiracy theory.
What countermeasures are being taken here in order to prevent what Deontay Wilder alleges happened the last time, this time?
You still plan on coming out in a moon suit?
JD's was present in the last fight as Tyson Fury's hands were being wrapped, yet this got past him.
And he's still in your corner.
He still has a job, so what are you doing differently? You're saying you don't need skill because you have power.
That's what you were saying before.
I don't got a horse in this race, I don't. Really don't care who wins, because regardless of who wins, I'm not holding my breath to see an undisputed champion crowned with this cycle of heavyweights. Whether Tyson Fury wins, Deontay Wilder wins, the division will stay divided.
These guys ain't gonna take on all comers.
Neither of them. That's why I'm not the least bit concerned over the outcome of this fight. Who keeps the belt, or
Doesn't matter.
wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see either of these guys swerve Alexander Usyk afterwards, whether it's Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder.
Neither of them are all that pressed to become undisputed champions.
So who cares? Just in keeping with the theme of heavyweight news and fight week, per tweet from Michael Benson, Tyson Fury on Anthony Joshua saying he still wants to fight him without the belts. This is coming from a guy who's got no belts now. Before, it was, I don't care who the fighter is, it's all about the belts and undisputed. He contradicts himself quite a bit.
What?
And just get yourselves ready, folks, because if Anthony Joshua can't win back those 3 alphabet titles, this will be the state of the heavyweight division.
Catty behavior.
Banter and barbs, though. Not a lot of boxing. I mean, we see what the state of the lightweight division is. You got any number of talented, young, unbeaten fighters there that aren't fighting each other. They rather send each other mean tweets instead. That could soon become the heavyweight division, depending on how things play out.
I'm really not waiting on Fury or Wilder to shoot for undisputed.
Depends. It all depends. I mean, I think Tyson Fury is a little bit more likely to shoot for undisputed depending on what happens with Joshua versus Usyk too. But if Usyk emerges the victor in the second fight the same way he did in the first, I'm not holding my breath to see an undisputed champion, because the same financial value, it won't be there. Tyson Fury himself stated, I think the fighters of the past were different men than current fighters today, not including myself, because I'm cut from an old cloth like they are. Fighters today making excuses, I don't think they would live with the old guys. Not at all. And Tyson Fury's just the latest postmodern boxer, likening himself to the fighters of old. Very recently, Gary Russell Jr., he did the same thing. He thinks he's a throwback fighter, like Harvin Magler.
You mean Marvin Hagler.
And I hate to say this, I don't want to be that guy, but these postmodern boxers, they got it a lot easier than those fighters of old. Tyson Fury, Gary Russell Jr. included.
They were held to a different standard because boxing was more mainstream.
A more rigid standard that was harder to meet because the eyes of the world were fixed on pugilism. But over the years, as the sport became less and less mainstream, it started getting less mainstream coverage from major news outlets and major networks. Too many fights were put behind a paywall, the audience dwindled, continues to dwindle, and you get these guys like a Deontay Wilder who can go 7 years without fighting a guy that's actually got a fucking pulse, and nobody notices.
Remember, he debuted in 2008.
He's been around for roughly 13 years, and all he's really had to show for it so far are 2 fights with Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz, who hasn't beaten anyone of note.
Let's see if he beats Fury this weekend.
Tyson Fury's been around roughly the same amount of time as Wilder. And he does have a very big win over Vladimir Klitschko, a win that I think is a lot bigger, a lot better than his win over Deontay Wilder, as Vladimir Klitschko reigned for roughly 9, close to 10 years. He was a unified champion. Tyson Fury put a stop to all of that.
Fury's resume is more solid than Wilder's.
Though not solid enough that he should be likening himself to the fighters of old. I mean, look at Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes fought Ernie Shavers 2 times. Ken Norton.
Unbeaten Ronaldo Snipes.
Unbeaten Jerry Cooney. Unbeaten Tim Witherspoon. He fought Trevor Berbick. He fought Mike Weaver. He fought Randall Cobb. I mean, there weren't very many, if any, fighters that Larry Holmes didn't fight. And that was the standard. You know, you didn't have a resume comprised of just 1 or 2 solid names, 1 or 2 solid fighters.
The way it is today.
It was a lot harder to get a title, and it was even harder to keep it way back when.
Look at Ali's resume.
You're putting yourself in the conversation with these fighters, these legends of old, and
They didn't swerve competition anywhere near as much as you guys do.
the somebodies fought the somebodies a lot more often way back when than they do here today. Here today, you might have to twist a guy's arm just to get the time of day. The somebodies fought the somebodies way back when, and they fought the somebodies more often. I mean, today's modern boxers, they're nowhere near as active as fighters of old used to be. I mean, take Larry Holmes, who I just mentioned, for example. That guy fought 4 times in 1983 against 3 unbeaten fighters and 1 journeyman.
You're lucky if you see these guys 2 times in 12 months.
Think about Tyson Fury's career. A 2-year hiatus due to mental health issues. More recently, he's been out of action roughly 18, 19 months.
He thinks he's old school.
Even worse is that nobody's expecting either Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury, regardless of who takes the W this weekend, to defend that green belt against all comers. There are a lot of people like me that don't even expect the winner of that fight to shoot for undisputed.
Whereas before that was the standard.
You guys ain't old school. And finally, a bit of news that's flying low on the radar. Richard Schaefer, who you might be familiar with, launches new boxing promotion and media company, Probellum. Probellum will focus most of its efforts on developing boxing outside of the United States. Former Golden Boy promoter Richard Schaefer has officially announced the launch of Probellum, a new boxing promotion and media company for which Schaefer will serve as the company's president. Probellum will attempt to leverage its relationships in several areas, including Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, among others, to take a more global approach to the heavily splintered and fragmented sport. One goal in particular that Schaefer mentioned is their ambitious plan to either promote, co-promote, or support over 100 events within the company's first year in operation, with an overwhelming majority of those events to be staged outside of the United States. Probellum will also look to leverage its digital platform to provide original content and associated programming around it as it builds its brand around the world. Obviously, Schaefer will be looking for better fortune with this endeavor after returning from a forced hiatus stemming from his fallout with Golden Boy to found Ringstar Sports in 2016, which later merged into Haymaker Ringstar the following year. Schaefer, however, insists this venture will be much different as he's assembled a team of individuals whom he believes gives him both the know-how and access to capital to succeed. Schaefer says Probellum's focus of interest will start in Africa, which Schaefer says has been a market that's been traditionally neglected despite showing promise with the rise in popularity in 2 mixed martial artists, Francis Ngannou and Kamaru Usman. More recently, Richard Schaefer signed former TMT alum Badou Jack. Based on this article, it appears that Badou Jack does mean to follow through with his claim that he's moving up the cruiserweight. He's all done at 175 pounds. And if he signed to Probellum,
Guess that means he's done with the money team.
I mean, I guess that means he's not with Mayweather Promotions anymore, not if he just signed to Probellum. He's currently ranked at number 5 with the WBA, number 6 with the WBC, and number 12 with the WBO in that weight class being the cruiserweight division.
He's not the only guy they brought on board.
Brought on board, so to speak. Unbeaten welterweight, Amon Stenionis. He's essentially continuing his career-long relationship with Richard Schaefer by being one of Probellum's fighters, Probellum's athletes.
Because he was already with Schaefer.
I wonder what all of this means for Nonito Donaire, who was very recently ordered by the WBC to defend his title against his mandatory challenger. He's still in bed with Richard Schaefer, and I wonder if we shouldn't expect an announcement by way of Probellum that Nonito Donaire has joined them.
They said something about having a digital platform.
Just a few days ago, I saw something about Probellum bringing presenter Ali Drew on board. You might be familiar with that name, Ali Drew, who's a freelance presenter that has done some work on DAZN. DAZN, as we all know, is a major platform with major financial backing, and I don't know what to make of Probellum just yet. It all sounds good, sounds great, very ambitious. They want to be a part of 100 shows. That's 100 cards in just their first calendar year. And a number like that, 100 shows.
Really?
What are we talking about? Big shows, big cards, or small domestic level shows? Small cards. They cite Badou Jack, and it sounds a lot like Badou Jack's fights moving forward are going to be based out of Dubai, as Badou Jack himself was quoted as saying, "Dubai is my second home, and I cannot wait to finally fight in front of all my UAE fans. My team at Badou Jack Promotions is excited to partner with the Probellum team to deliver several exciting fights to this region. Badou has always wanted to fight in the UAE, and I commend the Probellum team for fulfilling every promise they made in bringing this to life," said Amir Abdallah, manager of Badou Jack and CEO of Badou Jack Promotions. "We look forward to helping to grow boxing in that region and putting on some major fights in the near future. We have been seeing some activity, some grassroots push on the ground to stage more cards in that region of the world. Very recently, Steffi Cohen, Avril Mathy,
Martin Bacall.
they were in action in that region of the world, though not a part of this promotional outfit, Probellum or Badou Jack Promotions. That was by way of Core Sports, a different promotional company, though we are seeing a lot of movement on the ground to bring boxing to the UAE. And
They might have found some wealthy investors over there.
perhaps, there's a lot of long money in that region of the world. There's a lot of long money in the UAE, and it all boils down to who's going to foot the bill, who's going to pay for everything.
Where's the money going to come from?
You can say you want to be a part of or do 100 shows in one calendar year, your first calendar year, though ultimately somebody's got to pay for it, and there's no such thing as a free lunch.
It all sounds good.
But it all feels very immaterial. Hard to get a read on. Schaefer wants to take a more global approach to boxing because of the global market. It's a little hard to know if he's not biting off more than he can chew here.